Get ready for the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
It's still real to me, damn it.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of the Still Real Tough Show for May 24th, 2012, episode number 119. You know who we are. I am the champ, Jeff Peck, joined as always by the one and only Redneck Revolution Rise Up, Captain Obvious. Captain, how are we this week, my man?
I'm doing really well. Nice quiet day at home, relaxing with my daughter, and like I told you earlier, watching an underrated teen comedy called I Love You, Beth Cooper.
Wow, and maybe we'll have to say that for later on at the show, the I Love You, Beth Cooper review, because someone that listens to this podcast is going, you know what, Captain is right, that was a good teenage movie.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it'll be one of our polite listeners that actually knows us really well. Someone who just sent us a picture of Justin Bieber earlier today.
Yes, yes, that is the perfect way to get to our hearts, is either by politeness or Justin Bieber, as Eric knows. And we'll actually talk a little bit about that proposal I had for one Eric Darcy early on last week. In last week's edition of the show, we'll let you guys know if that happened or didn't happen. So stay tuned for that. But Captain, when you and I were talking about things to discuss on this week's show, typically you and I, the last couple of weeks, we are scratching our heads a little bit. We don't know what to talk about. There's some minor subjects, but nothing major that's out there in the wrestling news. I'm looking at our list for this week's show, and it seems like there's a lot more major stories than there are minor stories.
Yeah, you would think WWE would actually listen to our show and kind of like start spacing things out to make our jobs easier, but no, they'll have like 3 weeks of nothing. Then like, hey, let's just mess with the guys and throw a whole bunch of stuff out there at one time and just really kind of stick it to them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of amazing stuff going on this week when it comes to news, tidbits, reports. A certain wrestler or two wrestlers has reportedly quit TNA Wrestling. A former WWE diva is doing a great job of keeping her name out there and making people go, what the hell is she doing? Two announcers have a real-life argument reportedly at the pay-per-view. Raw is extending an hour. TNA adds another family member of the Hogan-Bischoff clan to their roster. And finally, the story that we'll kick it right off with this week, Captain, is WWE Over The Limit. The May pay-per-view is in the books. No titles changed hands. As you and I basically predicted on last week's show, the Big Show got involved in the main event match. That was no surprise to us. But from bottom to almost the top, sans the main event, it was a pretty decent pay-per-view. Top to bottom, minus the main event match, was a pretty good card. CM Punk, Daniel Bryan, that lived up to expectations. The tag team match was fun. The match with Christian and Cody Rhodes was interesting. The Battle Royal was interesting. And WWE continuing to do these things where they are having matches on pay-per-view that aren't announced. And it worked. I mean, Brodus Clay got the win over The Miz, and Ryback got a squash victory over Camacho. And no, Camacho is not a local wrestler. He is actually on the WWE roster, fans. So, Captain, I think from, the good portion of the card, with the exception of the main event, not a bad show by the WWE for a May pay-per-view.
Which, depending on your point of view, could be good or bad. Because to me, you want your main event to be the strongest match of your card, and in this instance, it was the worst match of the card. But everything else was a great build-up to that main event, and then the main event just kind of lackluster, to say the least. But then again, when you have a guy who hasn't been in a wrestling ring in 15 years, we talked about The Rock having ring rust. I'm sure John Laurinaitis had quite a bit of ring rust, if not just ring decrepitness.
Yes, ring decrepitus is one way that I would put that. John Laurinaitis, under the former moniker Johnny Ace, was a pretty decent worker in Japan. Part of what Michael Cole called one of the most influential tag teams of all time, aka the Dynamic Dudes. He and Shane Douglas there in the early days of WCW. It was. Here's the funny thing, Captain, is as I watched this main event match at Over the Limit, it was like another John Cena match that we've seen the last, counting this one, last three pay-per-views. He dominated the match with The Rock. Lesnar dominated the match with him. And then he dominated the match with John Laurinaitis. Since there's no really in between in this, and I think it continues to add that little head scratching that we have when it comes to the booking of John Cena. Did you get that same thing? Did you get the same aura that, lately with these pay-per-view main events, that the booking of John Cena, despite the opponent, let's talk about the match alone, is a little bit of a head-scratcher?
Well, I mean, considering the circumstances of his last three matches, I kind of understand it because, against The Rock hadn't been in the ring for 7 years. So if you're looking at it from a realistic point of view, Cena, who's been working nonstop for 10 years, should have had the edge in that match as far as ring work. They brought Brock Lesnar in as just like this big monstrous badass that is a legitimate fighter. He should have had the advantage on Cena, and then Sunday night against Laurinaitis, he's not. Technically, he's not a wrestler anymore. So John Cena should have dominated the match. So I understand the booking, but you kind of want to see a little more back and forth. I mean, think of the WrestleMania with Bret Hart versus Vince McMahon. Bret just basically beat him with a chair for 15 minutes. And that match, was basically lampooned just as bad as this match is.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, I just don't think this day and age that wrestlers versus non-wrestlers should be headlining a pay-per-view. And I think that some people listening to this show will then say, there's been pretty good wrestler versus non-wrestler matches. That Shawn Michaels Vince McMahon match at WrestleMania 22 wasn't too bad. Shane McMahon's had some pretty good matches on pay-per-view. But I really think if you're going to charge people their hard-working money, hard-earning money that they've had from the past week, month, whatever they've taken up to save up to watch this show, and pay $59 to $70 to sit there and watch a pay-per-view, the main event match should not be a wrestler versus non-wrestler match. Do you agree or disagree with that assumption that I just came up with there, Captain?
I think probably 95% of the time, you're right. I think when we had Stone Cold versus Vince, I mean, the build up for that match was so long, it was kind of worth the payoff. Shawn versus Vince wasn't really the main event of that WrestleMania, but there was a history, and this one, it's the history to me is more Laurinaitis versus Punk than it was Laurinaitis versus Cena. The Laurinaitis Cena has basically just been the last month and a half. So I didn't understand why you went with this match already. I would have liked to have seen Cena kind of take on more of his henchmen and then build up to him against Laurinaitis. This one just kind of felt rushed, and then with the obvious swerve at the end, it was basically like any of us could have booked that match.
Yeah, it's just really confusing stuff lately. I mean, you didn't think John Laurinaitis was going to get even a touch of offense in there, and he got very minimal. And I think a lot of people that listen to this show that are John Cena haters would laugh a little bit and say, well, it's very rare for anybody to get any type of offense into John Cena. But a non-wrestler, especially this match, there was no high hopes. And it was basically John Cena just whooping John Laurinaitis' ass for 10, 15, 20 minutes. And, I mean, you kind of lost interest in it.